Hello. For this month, I decided to do a 3-part video series on the politics of sex. So to start off, I wanted to begin with virginity as a concept and its harmful effects. Virginity is defined as just the state of being when someone has not had sex ever. But this concept is incredibly restrictive and oftentimes oppressive. So the easiest way to start out with this subject is to talk about how women specifically are affected by virginity as a concept. As someone assigned female at birth who still identifies as one, I've heard basically every cautionary tale surrounding sex under the sun. Don't have sex before marriage, or you might get pregnant, or people might think you're a slut, or both. All are messages presented by the media, by school, and by society at large. Women who are sexually active are labeled as ran through, loose, passed around, and many other descriptors that mean to identify the receiving woman as an object that has been used too much. Well, virginity does the same thing. It objectifies women because sex has mostly been presented in the mainstream as 1, heterosexual, and 2, as something to be taken from one party, usually, if not always, taken from the woman. In this way, sex is not described as something that happens with the subject, it's described as something that happens to an object. Although I realized from pretty early on that these rules of thumb were ridiculous and unrealistic, I still oftentimes find myself adhering to them, whether that's internally or with how I present myself or how I expect sex to be like. Many women realize the stupidity of these beliefs surrounding their sexualities, and yet they still have to deal with the implications and consequences, and oftentimes unknowingly adhere to these norms. According to Jacqueline N. Gunning, Angela Cooke-Jackson, and Valerie Rubinsky, quote, "Women and gender minorities indicate an absence of constructive or helpful memorable messages regarding their sexual and reproductive health. New research has found this to be a generational phenomenon in which problematic reproductive health narratives and messages, especially those about menarche and menopause, are passed from generation to generation. In addition, recent scholarship has found a relationship between the memorable messages young women receive and their body image satisfaction, self-esteem, and rape myth acceptance. Notably, these messages have lasting implications on young women's understanding of their reproduction, their sexual relationships, and sexuality." It's incredibly difficult to break out of these norms. Well, they're norms. That's kind of the whole point. The patriarchy demands that women and girls subjugate ourselves for others' comfort and pleasure. These notions obfuscate what sex is actually like and ignore how it varies from person to person. Oscar Wilde famously said, "Everything in the world is about sex. Except for sex. Sex is about power." Though I strongly disagree with this, I think that it perfectly sums up with how women have been taught about sex. As I said before, it's often framed as something being done to a woman instead of an experience that she's having with somebody else as an equal. Besides media and popular culture at large presenting this view of sex as something to be taken from a woman or done to a woman, religious institutions also teach about sex in this manner. Religion has oftentimes had a crucial and sinister role in how virginity has been weaponized against people of all kinds, but especially women. Quote, "With abstinence-only or abstinence-only-until-marriage education lacking information about safe sex practices, young adults turn to media to learn sexual alternatives to intercourse. But media does not always include proper methods of prevention, placing individuals at higher risk for sexually transmitted diseases." The detrimental nature of religious frameworks of sexuality is rooted in the belief that morality can be attributed to sex. For example, in Christianity, or in many sects of Christianity, it is believed that sex is purely for procreational purposes and after marriage. So having casual sex or premarital sex or any kind of sex that deters away from traditional values is immoral because it's like misusing sex. So again, to reiterate this, with religious frameworks, it makes it seem as though sex is like a chore. So losing one's virginity has to be done in the right way, right time, with the right person, in the right place. This line of thinking has no healthy outcomes, as people are inevitably going to be sexually active at some point. Quote, a study by Pearson and Chandra in 2008 investigating sexual agency in the transition from adolescence to adulthood found that young women's sexual agency is formed by and evolves with their attitudes towards sex. Notably, a strong sense of self, feelings of control, and the formation of healthy relationships all contributed to healthy understandings of sex and sexuality. Furthermore, Curtin, Ward, Merriweather, and Carruthers in 2011 found a direct correlation between sexual knowledge and sexual agency, with the development of feminist ideologies contributing to young women seeking sexual knowledge and subsequent sexual assertiveness. So we might as well teach about sex healthily, as people are going to be sexually active no matter what. Isn't it better if they have the resources needed to do so comfortably and safely, instead of denying them agency and security? To kind of shift gears for this conversation, I wanted to add in how virginity is used to shame people who haven't had sex. As a teen especially, there's always been so much pressure to not be sexually active, at least as a girl. But at the same time, there's also a lot of pressure to lose your virginity as quickly as possible. Like, a lot of pressure. Laura M. Carpenter describes virginity as it pertains to teenagers, especially within pop culture, as a gift, virginity as a stigma, and virginity loss as a rite of passage. I don't know about you, but I've definitely seen and felt all three of these kinds of things pushed on me by the mainstream. It feels like there's so much weight put onto sex in all of the wrong places. We emphasize the importance of losing. I meant losing your virginity here, that's my bad. Sex in the right way, with the right person, the right place, the right time. Yet we shun and actively avoid conversations surrounding parts of sex that we should be really sensitive about, like consent, power imbalances. The list goes on. According to Maura Kelly, quote, when theorized as sexual objects rather than subjects, female teenagers have little agency in determining the context of virginity loss, as well as subsequent sexual experiences. For example, Mitchell and Wellings found that young women are aware that their partner wants and anticipates intercourse and end up playing out a scene dictated by the male script. In the same research paper by Maura Kelly, she undertakes an analysis of these juxtaposing positions on virginity loss by exploring how the introduction to sexuality is portrayed in popular culture and media. She does so by dividing the tropes she's observed into three categories of scripts: the abstinence script, the management script, and the urgency script. Kelly delineates the abstinence script as follows. Quote, the abstinence script indicated a specific meaning of virginity and suggested appropriate action, the social control of teenage sexuality in which sexual behavior is delayed and risk is controlled. Virginity loss narratives following the abstinence script were characterized by the following themes: virginity as a gift, the pleasures of virginity and the positive consequences for maintaining virginity, often but not always until marriage, and the physical, mental, and social dangers of sex and the negative consequence of premarital sex. What I gathered from this observation is that the abstinence script has to do more with preserving innocence than any of the other scripts. I feel like this script uses kid gloves more so than the other tropes in order to further propagate this narrative of conserving some sort of arbitrary purity. The weight of morality and religious overtones fall mostly over the abstinence script. Just as some examples of this, One Tree Hill and Seventh Heaven feature the abstinence script in all of its glory. For the management script, she states, quote, the management script suggested teenage sexual activity was inevitable, if not entirely desirable. It focused on managing the physical, social, and emotional risk associated with virginity loss, most notably through the promotion of contraception. Virginity loss narratives following the management script employed the following set of themes: virginity loss as a rite of passage, emphasis on appropriate virginity loss, i.e. the teenager is at least 16, is in a monogamous romantic relationship, uses contraception, and discusses sex with an adult, and positive consequences when sex is appropriate and negative consequences when sex is inappropriate. The management script comes off to me as one that carries a twinge of acceptance that teenagers are gonna have sex at some point in almost any circumstance. This minuscule acceptance does not exonerate this trope, however, as although certain sexual relations are inappropriate and intolerable, such as any power imbalance, I can't say some of the words on YouTube, but you know what I mean. Using appropriate and inappropriate as identifiers for sex generally has the potential to be turned against, say, queer relationships. And also, oftentimes, the loss of virginity is shown in a case of, say, adultery or something that's used in order to paint this corrupted picture of sex without any healthy alternative. Examples of the management script are Everwood, Gilmore Girls, and Summerland. Lastly, Kelly describes the urgency script. Quote, "The urgency script portrayed virginity loss as not only a highly enjoyable activity, but as necessary to affirm a gendered identity as a sexually sought-after individual, to be perceived by others as desirable, and to achieve social status. Narratives employing the urgency script were characterized by the following themes: stigma of virginity, deception about sexual history and desperation to have sex, and positive consequences and increased status for successful virginity loss, and negative consequences for unsuccessful virginity loss attempts in the form of failed performances of masculinity." It's interesting how Kelly mentions the effects that this trope has on masculinity. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, virginity as a concept affects all parties. Though I can definitely speak more to how it's been weaponized against women, it's weirdly detrimental to heterosexual men's images. Masculinity shows its laughable delicacy in many different ways, but I'd say that virginity reigns supreme in exposing just how ridiculously sensitive traditional masculinity is. Examples of the urgency script in action include Life as We Know It, Euphoria, and virtually any teen drama, to be honest. So to conclude the first chapter of the Sex Politics series, I'll end with this. Everyone is entitled to preventing unwanted pregnancy and STDs. Everyone is entitled to pleasure, healthy and safe sexual experiences, and access to images of sexuality as normal and acceptable, regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, class, ability, or sexual orientation. At the same time, you do not have to have sex. You can always opt out and change your mind. You can say no to sex entirely. And just because you're a virgin or inexperienced does not mean that you are excluded from having agency. So what are your experiences with virginity as a concept? How were you first introduced to sex by your family, if at all? How did you learn about it generally? What stigmas have you noticed in action? I'll leave you with that. See you next time.